Cool. Good morning. It's here, but you're here for the good part. That's nice to see. My name is Benji. Some of you know me from the Summer Academy. I spent more or less the first 2 weeks in the San Francisco location, giving most of the lectures. If you were not here in San Francisco or not part of the Summer Academy, then you probably don't know me yet. I missed the first week with the retreat because I was in Germany. So I'll give you a short introduction. I've been with Make School for the last 2 years, actually 2 years and a month or so. And while I was here, I spent most of the time developing the curriculum for the Summer Academy, last year's gap year program, this year's 2-year program. Amongst a few other things, since we're a small startup, I also got involved in things like hiring, website development, marketing, all kind of different things. But for the biggest part, I'm an iOS developer. I've been doing that for a total of 4 years now. I studied in Germany, and we have a pretty cool model in the town where I grew up, where you can study CS, but you also get hired by a company, which in my case was IBM. So I had a chance of doing a lot of internships while I studied. After that, I joined a small company, was like an iOS development agency. I worked there as an iOS developer for a year on various projects. One of the biggest ones was an iPad solution for a supermarket chain. What they did, they had a lot of paperwork for ordering products, keeping track of how many products they have in the store. And they replaced all of that paperwork with an iPad solution. So I did that for a year as a developer, and then 1 year as a project lead of a team of more or less 5 people. So yeah, over the last 4 years, mostly iOS, but also other technology stuff and a little bit of project management as well. That's kind of my background. And over the next, I think it's a total of almost 2.5 months, I'm going to spend a lot of time with you teaching you iOS development. I'm going to start with a short lecture that's going to give an overview of the project and the way we want to approach learning in that section. And then we're going to dive right into the first lecture that's actually the content of that iOS development part. If I speak too loud or too soft or too fast, let me know. I'm also a foreigner, even though I grew up with English. So if you don't understand something I say, feel free to ask and point it out. Okay, so I specifically called this Mastering iOS Development because, as I'll point out later again, it's really important that you went through the Summer Academy material before this course. We will not start entirely from scratch. We will be friendly enough to offer some recap on things that confuse you and do breakout sessions to refresh things. But we are not starting from zero. It's really the goal is to take you from your basic skills that you have from the Summer Academy to actually a skill level where you could work on an iOS development job pretty sufficiently. The timeline over the next couple of weeks is outlined here. We're going to start with an assigned project, and I've planned that lasts for more or less 3 weeks. It will depend a little bit on your skill level. That assigned project, I'll point out later the details of that, but the idea is you get a project spec. I'll give you a set of features and a set of screens that you should implement. And beyond that specification, you won't get too much guidance. So it's very much basically building the app on your own, based on client expectations. And the way we'll give you feedback, I'll talk about it later more, is through code reviews. So we're going to start out with that assigned project. And the goal of that assigned project is also to really, basically I thought about what are the things every iOS developer should have touched before they go onto a job. And I tried to squeeze them into one project, just the most important things. So as you go through implementing that assigned project, you will encounter a lot of APIs and basically techniques that you need to be an iOS developer. Also, we'll have much more lectures here at the beginning because these lectures basically go with the things that you will need for that assigned project. So when we talk about how can I store things in a local database, then we'll have a lecture on that, and it will also be a thing that you will need in the assigned project. That's why at the beginning we're going to have a lot of lectures, 1 to 2 per day, because you will need them all for the assigned project. And then as you go into the personal project phase, these lectures will get smaller, and they will be more on optional topics. So there are a lot more things that I can cover that are not essential, and that will happen more in the second part. So after you're done with the assigned project, you will transition into working on a personal project. That is very much similar to the Summer Academy, just that you will have much more insight into technology. You'll be able to tackle much bigger projects, and you'll actually be able to build projects where you build the client and the server from scratch without relying a lot on frameworks like Parse. And that will give you a lot of options to pursue ideas that you maybe couldn't do during the summer. Timeline for this is planned to be starting in November basically going all the way through winter break and then shipping within the first week of the new year. The goal here was that in case you have features that you haven't finished implemented yet, you can spend your winter break instead of with friends in front of a computer and finishing your project. So, as I mentioned, Summer Academy iOS development track, really important. We won't go over all the basics again. So you should go through that. If you haven't done it, you should be starting now in parallel. But I hope that most of you have done this before. If you have questions about what this entails, essentially it's all the stuff that people did during the Summer Academy in the first 2 to 3 weeks. These are the playgrounds on Swift, and then the 2 tutorials called Make School Notes and Makestagram. And these should get you started on the most important aspects of iOS development. So the learning approach as compared to the projects that you've done so far. If you have been part of the Summer Academy, then you know that the first 2 to 3 weeks were very much step-by-step instructions. So the tutorials will tell you exactly which files to create, which code to put where, as very much guided, because you had no experience at that point. Then the Twitter bot project is somewhat step-by-step challenges. So we still tell you how you should approach a project and which feature you should implement at which point in time, but we don't give you the full solution. For this course here, as I said, the structure is going to be even more loose. It's much more like when you would join on a job and you have a mentor and you have the internet and you have basically your first project to work on. We're going to have a project specification, then a lot of lectures that are going to teach you the features that you need to implement. And another really important aspect will be outside resources. Throughout the lectures and also now at the beginning, I'll point to a lot of relevant resources that you can use, and you should utilize them on your own to become a better iOS developer. And then we'll use code reviews to look at how you implement that assigned project and to give you feedback on your implementation. And from what I heard from the students from last year, that these code reviews really were the most relevant aspect in their learning, because it can be very much tailored to you specifically, to your strengths and weaknesses. So that's the advantage of this kind of free-form project. It's going to be very much like working on a team where you submit code to a common project and you get code reviews from more experienced developers. And yeah, the essential here is that you have to come up with your entirely own solution based on the constraints and specification that we give you. The lectures are very much targeted to give you a high-level overview. So I like to say that it's the stuff that is hard to Google, and I think that is where I can provide the most value. If I stand in front of you and recite Apple documentation or recite resources that already exist there, that's not the interesting part. But what I can do is I can give you the overview of all the topics that are interesting. I can give you the terminology and really stuff that is difficult to navigate. And from there, you can dive into the resources to actually learn the details on your own. I'll, as part of the lectures, also provide recommended reading and reference to other resources. So I'll try to keep the lectures as short as possible and then give you time to study the details on your own. The covered topics, I don't want to go into the whole list here, but that's kind of the rough overview and the categories. As I said, the essential idea is that you could go to a job interview after this year and basically have a good idea of most of the topics that people will ask you about. That covers general application development topics such as networking, threading, persistence, client-server synchronization. It also has some iOS-specific stuff like working efficiently with Xcode, with instruments, debugging applications, memory management on iOS. And we also have stuff more in the advanced topics that we'll talk about when you go into your freeform project. And these are things like automated testing and also different programming paradigms such as functional programming, functional reactive programming, and so on. So in that end of the spectrum, we're more on optional things where not every student will be interested, but you'll get a chance to see topics outside of the core curriculum. Evaluation is also an important part of what we're going to do. As I said, code reviews are going to be the main way to give feedback to you. So it's important that when you start this project, that you develop on a specific branch in Git and keep the master branch in a way that we can review it at any point in time. We'll try to do the code reviews on Thursdays and Fridays, but as things come up, it's hard to know exactly which time it will happen. So when you develop, try to develop on a separate branch and then merge that into master whenever you think that is a version that I would be happy if an instructor would review that. We can talk about the details of that as we get started on the iOS project. We also can have a feedback form, and I've linked to it in the slide. The feedback form essentially will give you a good idea of the things that we're looking for in general, beyond code reviews. There's things in there like collaboration, how you interact with instructors, if you ask for help frequently, So if you want to get an idea of what we're going to base our feedback for you on, then take a look at the feedback form. It is linked on these slides. The goal of that feedback is not to give you a grade. It is to allow you to self-reflect, to see where you can improve, and that is really helpful in my experience if you want to become a better developer or a better member in general of the school. So the feedback form is really mostly just for yourself and not for outside evaluation. Any questions on this? I see some question marks. Yes? The feedback is for you, yes. So it will not be shared with anyone else. The feedback form will basically have some time towards the end of the semester where we will sit down with you. We'll talk about different categories. We'll give you your feedback. And it will only serve the purpose that you can try to improve in these areas. Yes, we actually should have. And that was something I want to discuss with Dan. But essentially, we also receive feedback from you, obviously. Right? What's the status of that?
Well, we have been sending out anonymous forms for the students to fill out via email.
Okay. So apparently we have been sending out feedback forms. So if you have feedback about specific instructors, you should address it as part of that feedback form. I think we'll clarify this and get back to you. But essentially, yes, we always are keen for feedback. Also, if you want to deliver it in person to us directly, that's also great. If you don't feel comfortable, we'll have forms for that. So outside resources, as I said, a really essential part, because a lot of what you will learn here will be, that's the nature of our school, will be based on your own passion about the topics that you're learning about. We won't force you to read all the stuff, but I want to give you a lot of resources that you can use. And given that we live in a city as San Francisco, where there's a lot of stuff going on, one of the first great resources are local meetup groups. There are two that I actually go to every month, and that is the Swift Language User Group and NS Meetup. And actually, there was one last week, and I saw some people at the Swift Language User Group meetup. That was pretty cool. So the format of these meetups is that developers come in and give talks on different topics, and you get free food and drinks, and you listen to these talks, and it's actually a very casual way of learning about new topics and just getting in touch with the community, meeting other developers, meeting companies. Really great way to get in touch with people in SF. And meetup.com also has a ton of other meetups. I think there are at least like 10 more focused on mobile development or iOS development. So if you have nothing better to do with your evenings, you should go out and attend these meetups. There are also a ton of recorded talks. So these are produced at local meetup groups. These are partly provided by Apple as part of the official developer conference. And there are a lot of other conferences out there. And typically all the conferences, as part of their marketing, upload talks, and you can watch them for free online. As part of my lectures, I will also link to relevant ones. But if you Google, you'll often find these talks, and it's a really great way to get a kind of a condensed overview of a topic by listening to a talk by an experienced developer. There are also newsletters that are really good. The three ones that I would recommend subscribing to are iOS Stuff Weekly, This Week in Swift, and iOS Goodies. These newsletters basically combine all the things that happened over the last week and share them with you in a condensed format. So if you want to stay up to date with the latest trends in iOS development, new frameworks, new third-party libraries, then that is a good way to subscribe. And you don't have to type that down now since you have all the slides. But there are also some good blogs. I think my favorite one still is NS Hipster. They send out updates weekly. Then there are more advanced blogs, like one written by Mike Ash. If you're really into the details of how the Swift language is implemented, if you like compilers and such kind of theoretical topics, then there are some really good blog posts there. And Objective-C.io is no longer updated, but they have basically, I think, like 40 issues of different topics that are covered. And that is a really great resource as well. So you can see there's more than enough that you can read about. And there are some more advanced books. Some of them we have here in the bookshelf. So I won't go in detail about all of them, but a really good one if you want to get up to speed on Objective-C because you have a project that is still written in Objective-C, or because you want to apply to a company that uses a lot of Objective-C, then Effective Objective-C 2.0 is a very good book that will teach you a lot of the implementation details. And I think we have it in the bookshelf as well. So, a lot of resources, and you can spend as much time as you want learning additional stuff besides the lectures. But let's get into a assigned project that you should implement. And that is called the Trip Planner Project. So the idea of this project is that you allow users to plan trips Trips basically just consist of a name or location we want to go to, and then they consist of different waypoints. So there are different use cases for this app. Let's say I want to make a road trip, then I can add different waypoints on the way, and I have an easy overview of the collection of these waypoints. And the way you can add them is through a search field. That search field will search the Google API for the location name. Then we want you to display the location on the map, and if the user selects the location and saves it, then it is added to a planned trip. So essentially, the features of this app, I try to keep them as simple as possible, while still allowing you to incorporate a lot of different technologies and techniques. So it looks simple on the surface, but as you will see in the next 2 to 3 weeks, if you actually implement this from scratch, including the backend, then it's quite a lot of work, and will teach you a lot about iOS development. There's some technical requirements, so we want to make sure that you use certain techniques and technologies. The first one is that we want you to write a server yourself. So as part of the Twitter bot project, you already started to get in touch with the Flask API, I believe, and with Python as a programming language. And for this project, we want you to build a server on your own, and we'll give you some guidance on that. We also want you that the user can persist these strips that they create locally using core data. And here we don't use Realm, even though Realm is simpler, because core data is used by a lot of companies out there. And if you actually want to apply for an iOS developer job, then understanding core data is one of the essential requirements for a lot of jobs. And it's also one of the more complicated iOS frameworks. So if you can navigate it and understand it well, then you will prove to potential employers that you are good at reading documentation, understanding references, and that you can understand how to use a more or less complex API. As I said, to search for places, we want you to use the Google Places API. And that part will teach you how to use an external API as part of your iOS app. And lastly, that is more of an optional requirement. I'll talk about that more later. We want you to synchronize these strips that you created locally with your API server. So over the summer, you use the Parse framework. And with Parse, it's fairly easy to have your local data being synced with the server. But as part of this exercise, we want you to attempt to do that all on your own. So this last step here can become very complex. So I expect most students to only implement a subset of that. But if you're really fast, then at the end, you'll have basically a small Parse implementation that will synchronize your local data with the server, and you have implemented all of that on your own. And the reason here is that really most companies out there, when they build complex products, will not use Parse for multiple reasons. Mostly, they have some specific requirements, and Parse is just a too generic framework to implement that. So at some point, modifying Parse or using Parse in a very specific way becomes so expensive that it's better to implement your custom solution. And as part of this project, we want to really give you a chance to explore that, not only using existing solutions, but actually implement a lot of stuff on your own and learn while doing that. At the end of the project, and that I think is also really important, you will get an example implementation that was written by me. There I focused a lot on following a lot of best practices. I wrote tests basically for the entire application. So at the end, you'll see what it could look like if a more experienced developer would have implemented the same project. That will help you even half a year from now to compare your solution to that one and to ask me questions about it. Okay, do we have any questions on the design project? Yes. I think for this project, that's a little bit too strong deviation. For us, it's easier for the code reviews, and for you, it's easier to share with other if you follow that exact specification. And yeah, if you're good, then it's only going to last 2 or 3 weeks, and then you'll be off to implement your own product. And you can probably also reuse a lot of the code in your own project in the end. Okay.